Well, good morning everyone and welcome to Church Without Walls in Hornsea. Church without the opportunity to get together. What very strange times we're living in these days. It's so strange not to be meeting face to face. And I think we're beginning to appreciate how important that has been to each one of us. We've learned the importance of a lot of things over the last few weeks. We've learned the importance of hand washing. Now, some of us were doing that before it became trendy. But now, judging by the shelves in the supermarkets, everybody's jumping on the bandwagon and joining in. We're learning to wash their hands. So that's interesting, isn't it? I've learned how often I touch my face. I never realised that how often I would touch my face and do things like this and contemplate the wise sort of scratchy beard that I haven't got kind of thing. But I never realised I did it so much, rubbing my eyes, until I was told that I'm not supposed to do it anymore. Learn that some can be selfish hoarders, and that's very sad, but at the same time we've also learned how some people can be very kind to strangers, and there's lots of sharing and reaching out in communities, and that's a positive thing that's come from this whole coronavirus episode that's going on. People genuinely caring for each other and showing respect for others as well, and that's been heartening. I think in the coming days we're going to learn a lot more. For example, we're going to have to learn how to make a little go a long way. And that's, I bought that fresh this morning, opened the curtains, looked out across the road at the cost cutter across the road from where Ellen and I live, and there was somebody coming out with some rolls of toilet paper. So I quickly got some clothes on and shoes and ran across the road and joined the queue to stock up. Not to stockpile, just to make sure that we've got enough. So there we go. As a church, we've been working through these Lent periods, looking at the miraculous signs that John records in his gospel. Miraculous signs that John says points to the glory of Jesus Christ and the fact that Jesus is God. The one true God is Jesus, this man that John has walked with and talked with and sat next to and walked alongside and shared food with. This man is the one true God. And John recorded these events specifically for us, as he says in his word, in John chapter 20, from verse 30 and 31, he says, Jesus worked many other miraculous miracles for his disciples, and not all of them are written in this book. But these are written so that you will put your faith in Jesus as the Messiah and the Son of God. If you have faith in him, you will have true life. And that's what John wants us to have, true life, by trusting in Jesus Christ. So he's recorded just 7 of the miracles, the many miracles that Jesus performed that demonstrate that he is God. And so far we've looked at the first one, turning water into wine, where we see that Jesus can make something special out of something very ordinary, and that's what he's done with each person who trusts in him. He makes us special, makes us part of his kingdom, makes us world transformers, kingdom builders, just ordinary people like you and I. When Jesus touches us and changes our lives. We saw him healing an official's son from a great distance away. Didn't have to be right close to him, 25 miles away from the man, and yet his powerful word spoke out and healed that official's son, somebody who was on his deathbed, and Jesus was able to reach him. And that's encouraging to know that wherever we are, even in isolation, Jesus is with us all the time. We looked at Jesus healing a man on the Sabbath. We hear about him healing that man who was by the pool all alone, being an invalid for 38 years, nobody to help him, and yet Jesus comes, seeks him out, finds him, gives hope to the hopeless. And that's what we looked at last week in John chapter 5. So now today we're going to be looking at the 4th miraculous sign, which, just checking the screens on, is feeding the 5,000, quite a well-known account, and we're going to have a look at this together. It's found in John chapter 6, verses 1 to 15. Now the verses are going to come up on this screen here. I don't know how well you can see that on the video, but I will read it, and feel free to follow it and check it out. Find it in your own Bible. If you haven't got a Bible, you can download a copy from the internet free of charge. You can get an app on your phone called YouVersion, which is a very good one. There are probably others as well, but you can get the Bible in lots of different English translations and carry it with you at all times. So this says from verse 1, it says that Jesus crossed Lake Galilee, which was also known as Lake Tiberias. A large crowd had seen him work miracles to heal the sick, and those people went with him. It was almost time for the Jewish festival of Passover, and Jesus went up on a mountain with his disciples and sat down. When Jesus saw the large crowd coming toward him, he asked Philip, "Where will we get enough food to feed all these people?" He said this to test Philip, since he already knew what he was going to do. Philip answered, "Don't you know that it would take almost a year's wages just to buy only a little bread for each of these people?" Andrew, the brother of Simon Peter, was one of the disciples. He spoke up and said, "There is a boy here who has 5 small loaves of barley bread and 2 fish. But what good is that with all these people?" The ground was covered with grass, and Jesus told his disciples to have everyone sit down 2 meters apart. About 5,000 men were in the crowd. 5,000 men, many of you will know, that implies that the crowd was probably at least twice that. Women and children weren't counted in that head count for some reason. Very patriarchal society. That's how it was. Verse 11, Jesus took the bread in his hands and gave thanks to God. Then he passed the bread to the people, and he did the same with the fish, until everyone had plenty to eat. The people ate all they wanted, and Jesus told his disciples to gather up the leftovers so that nothing would be wasted. The disciples gathered them up and filled 12 large baskets with what was left over from the 5 barley loaves. After the people had seen Jesus work this miracle, they began saying, "This must be the prophet who is to come into the world." What they're saying there is that Jesus must be the Messiah, the one that the whole of the Old Testament has been looking forward to, the one that the people of God have been waiting for, the deliverer that has been sent by God, the liberator, the anointed one. Jesus must be him. They saw something special happening. This is a cartoon you'll probably find on the internet. Some of you may have seen it on cards. Jesus is offering the fish and the bread, and people are asking, has it been tested for mercury? Is it gluten-free? Complaining that they're on vegan diets and so on. Some people talk about this miraculous sign and ask the question, I'm going to drink some tea, ask the question, is it truly a miracle? Some suggest that when they saw that Jesus had got some food, they all remembered that they got some food themselves, and they all unpacked their what do they call here, pack-ups, their packed lunches. They all suddenly go, "Oh, I've got some food," and they started sharing amongst them. So it wasn't really a miracle. I don't know about you. When I was in school, when I were a lad, as we used to say, going on a school trip, myself and my friends, and it seemed like every kid on the bus, we get on the coach in the school playground in the morning, and before we'd even left the playground, we all unpacked our lunches and eaten our sandwiches and swapped crisps and eaten our biscuits and our apple and whatever else was going on. And I'm not very good at waiting for food. Jesus knew that these people were hungry. Probably heard a collective 5,000 plus tummy rumble, and the people were hungry themselves. Surely they would have remembered that they'd got food well before they got to that state. And yet we see in this account of Jesus feeding 5,000 people is actually recorded by all 4 of the gospel writers. They all present it as an account of something that actually happened, that a miracle actually happened. Matthew and John, 2 of the gospel writers, were actually there at the place. They saw what happened themselves. They didn't see anyone else get the food out. They saw what Jesus did. Mark, in his gospel account, probably scholars will say, got his details from Peter. Peter was there as an eyewitness, and he saw what was happening. Luke, the physician, the doctor and historian, says in his account he went to great pains to find out exactly what happened, to present an accurate record of all that happened in the life of Jesus, and he spoke to the eyewitnesses firsthand. This is not some legend that was passed on. This was something that was recorded as a miracle. The people there recognised it as a miracle. The people actually who received that food recognised this as a miracle, which is why they got so excited about it, which is why they followed Jesus again afterwards. And if you follow on in John chapter 6, you'll find out Jesus having a whole discourse, a whole conversation with them about, is this and whether he is the new Moses or not, because they would remember John's Gospel says it was a desolate place. Mark's historic record describes it as a desolate place. This was a place where there was nothing, and they would remember from their history about very approximately about 1500 years earlier, when Moses was leading the people of God through a desolate place, through a wilderness, that God provided them with food. They had the manna from heaven, and they thought, this is the people who were there receiving this bread and fish from the hands of Jesus were thinking, here is somebody who can provide food in the wilderness. This was an exciting time. This was a very important sign for them. They made them think, who is this man? And they started to recognise who he was. Everyone who was there saw it as a miracle of God's provision. 2,000 years later, some people try to explain it away. I believe that Jesus performed a miracle, and that's why those who recorded it made such an effort to get the details right. So let's have a think about what actually happens here. What can we learn from this miraculous sign of Jesus feeding over 5,000 people? First point is that Jesus can make something out of nothing. Isn't that encouraging? Sometimes we feel useless and powerless and helpless. And what do we have to offer? But Jesus, just like he can turn ordinary water into quality wine, so he can take people like you and me, ordinary people, and turn us into the treasures of heaven, turn us into world transformers, turn us into people of power, people who will build his kingdom. Jesus takes the ordinary and makes it special. The second lesson we can learn from this, I'm sure there's many other lessons as well, but with Jesus, nothing is too little to have a big impact. Jesus can use small things. Now, amongst a crowd of over 5,000 people, 5 small loaves and 2 small fish were certainly not enough. I don't know if you've ever had, well, not these days, too dangerous, but in the past had one of those family gatherings where, or you've thrown a party and you've catered and you think you've had enough, and then people turn up and you realise that what you thought was enough isn't going to go far enough by any means. And you need to start rationing out. But Jesus can take what's too little, he can make a little go a long way. We can be tempted to think that we have nothing to offer Jesus. We can easily think that it's other people who make a difference and build his kingdom. It's other people who have the skills, the drive, the courage to impact society. The lesson for you, for me, is that Jesus, in Jesus' hands, he can turn us into world transformers. Sometimes we're so disheartened at what we think, the little that we think we can do, that we want to give up. As Matthew records a parable that Jesus told of a master who had 3 servants, and he was going away and he gave the first one, I think it's 8 talents, 8 coins, and he said, invest this, do something with it. And he said to the second one, here's 5 talents, go away, do something with it. And he gave the last servant, he gave him just 1 talent. Imagine just £1. What can you do with £1? And that was the thinking of that servant. And he just thought, there's nothing I can do with this. So what did he do with it? He did nothing. And when the master comes back, he's so disappointed because this man had an opportunity to do something and he chose to do nothing. Let's not fall into that trap. Let's not fall into this idea. Let's not let the world convince us that we can't make a difference, and so give up before we even try. Because the lesson from this parable of feeding the 5,000, that too little in our eyes can be too much when Jesus gets hold of it. These people, it says in the miracle, in the account that we have, that the leftovers were more. There was more food left over at the end of this miracle than they had when they started, and that's after the people were stuffed, full to the gills, absolutely bloated with the food. They'd all had enough, and yet there was still more left over at the end. What a miracle that is. Third and final lesson on this is that Jesus can use the poorest offering to demonstrate his glory. Barley loaves were poor people's food. This was near to the Passover. Mark's Gospel describes the green grass. John tells us it's near the Passover. This was very early on in the season. We just yesterday celebrated the spring equinox. That means that our spring is well on the way now. The hours of daylight are greater than the hours of darkness. Isn't that exciting to think? Light is overcoming the darkness. Days are going to be getting longer and longer as we push through spring into summer, even if we have to spend it indoors. This bread was made from the leftovers of the previous year's harvest. It would be coarse barley loaves, probably a bit like pita bread, just flat unleavened bread. Barley loaves were poor people's food. It was a lot cheaper than expensive wheat flour. This was not posh nosh. Although today, if you were to go to an artisan bakery to buy a barley loaf, you'd probably pay a premium for it because it's a bit rustic and a bit out of the ordinary. But in Jesus' day, this was poor people's food. The fish was probably something like dried sardines, not smoked salmon or anything else like that. 5 small, flat, cheap loaves and 2 small dried sardines were not the fare of feasts and fine dining. This was poverty rations. This was not enough to present to a dignitary or royalty. Certainly not enough, you would think, to present to the King of Kings. It's the sort of food you'd be embarrassed to show anybody. And yet somebody had the courage to give it to Jesus. A small boy who had just enough for himself placed what he had in the hands of Jesus, and Jesus transforms that into working something miraculous that would more than satisfy the need and bring him the glory. Do you ever feel that what you have to contribute isn't enough? Do you worry that your prayers will be all jumbled and meaningless? Do you hold back from Jesus because you think he's only interested in the nice people, the good people, the clever people? Jesus' hands are open and waiting. By yourself you may never amount to much, but when you trust in Jesus and place yourself in his hands, he can use you to transform society, build a kingdom which will last forever and bring glory to himself. History is full of accounts of ordinary people who did amazing things because they submitted to Jesus. They placed themselves in his hands. They said, "You are Lord, I am the servant. I will go where you want me to go. I will do what you want me to do. I want to glorify you." And when we're in that position, Jesus can take us and use us to do incredible things. That's a picture of a fish finger butty, one of my favourites. A cheap meal, just a scrap of food, but given to Jesus is more than satisfied the need. Just a small offering, just a kind word to a stranger. Does it make any difference? In the name of Jesus it does. Just a stuttering, fumbling attempt to explain your faith to a friend. Just a short prayer for somebody who is anxious. Just a card sent to somebody you miss. Just a small church family without a building. That's us. Just a simple praise song sung out of tune. Just a small amount placed in the offering by a widow who gave all she had. Just a collection of fishermen, tax collectors, political activists and outcasts. Just a piece of wood and 3 nails. Given to Jesus, they can transform lives. They can revolutionise the world and glorify God. You can be a kingdom builder, not by yourself, but by placing yourself in Jesus' hands and saying, "Lord, I don't think it's enough. Lord, I don't think it's good enough, but it's all I've got. I give it to you." Be blessed. Take care. Wash your hands. Ration the toilet paper. Do all that you need to do to get through these strange times. One day we're going to be back together. We're going to be celebrating all that the Lord has done. I believe in these days we have an opportunity to see his kingdom grow in other ways. yeah, it's hard not meeting together. I miss it as much as anybody else. I'd be the worst trying to keep 2 metres away from people, because I naturally want to reach out, shake hands and hug and just touch people on the arm and give them an encouraging punch in the shoulder or whatever it is. I'm just that kind of a person. We've got to stay safe. We've got to heed government advice. It's not forever. It's for a short time. Keep praying for each other. Keep in touch with each other. Keep seeking to see his kingdom being built in ways that we didn't think possible if we can't meet together. Be blessed. In Jesus' name, amen.